Okay, welcome everyone. Portland, Oregon lies within the traditional homelands of the Multnomah, Oregon City Tumwater, Waltlala, and Clackamas Chinooks, and the Tualatin Kalapuya peoples who were relocated to the Grand Ronde Reservation under the Kalapuya, etc. 1855 ratified treaty, also known as the Willamette Valley Treaty, 1855. Today, these tribes are part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. The Grand Ronde people continue to maintain a connection to their ancestral homelands and maintain their traditional cultural practices. Thank you all for joining us this evening as we close the Beyond Boundaries Visions of Ecological Future Symposium. I'd like to thank all of the wonderful artists and scholars who have shared their knowledge with us throughout these 3 days of the symposium, including Dr. Stacia Limo, Stephanie Santos, Sugar Todd, Meech Boakye, and all of the amazing students and scholars who shared their work through the 3 panel conversations and their artwork as part of the Cat's Cradle student exhibition. I'd like to also thank our symposium planning committee, Lauren Huff, Loan Hatano, and Emma Weissman. The planning process started with us almost a year ago and has been a true gift to work with these wonderful humans on such a beautiful series of events. A special thank you also to all of the staff at PNCA who have supported the symposium infrastructure in so many ways, especially Danny Broderick, our wonderful AV tech. Thank you all. Please join us after this talk for a gathering in the atrium. We'll have some nourishing food, and we invite you to meet one another and talk and build community together. This year's symposium encompassed a wide array of programming, including a somatic creative writing experience, 2 beautiful workshops centered on working creatively with natural materials and processes, panel conversations, and keynote lectures from Dr. Stacia Limo and Meech Boakye. At the center of all this programming is an invitation to reflect on how ecological entanglements shape and are shaped by lived experience, artistic practice, and political struggle, with perspectives rooted in feminist, queer, trans, indigenous, Black, and disabled approaches to ecological thought. Now I'll turn the mic over to one of our 2 amazing symposium coordinators, who are both MA candidates in PNCA's Critical Studies program, Loan Hatano.
Hello. I'm going to give a little reflective spiel. Beyond Boundaries is coming to an end. However, the work continues. The connections made here will branch and propagate as the ideas that have been planted here will germinate in ways we cannot predict. The futures imagined here are already beginning. We moved through workshops where thinking became doing, where ideas took shape in our hands and our breath. We've been reminded that futures are not singular, they are multiple, that they are not distant destinations, though they are seeds already germinating in the present. That the work of imagining them is not separate from the work of living them. We've learned that ecological thinking is not about going back to nature as if nature were a place we could return to, separate from the social and political worlds we inhabit. Instead, we've been reminded that ecology is always already intersectional, queer, feminist, and anti-colonial. That you cannot think seriously about ecosystems without thinking about power, about whose bodies have been naturalized as less than human, about whose lands have been extracted and whose knowledge has been erased. We do not need to do anything dramatically different when we leave here. The work is quieter, yet more persistent. The work is reflected within your body's ecosystem, hosting billions of microorganisms without which you could not live. It's remembering that the breath you just took contains atoms that have cycled through countless other bodies, human and not. It's paying attention to who is made vulnerable by environmental harm and refusing to imagine futures that require someone else's sacrifice. It tells stories and creates art, teaching lessons, building relationships with land, with each other, with the more than human kin we share this planet with. We want to thank the people who made this gathering possible. Lauren, your brilliance and persistence. Megan, your actions and thoughtfulness. Emma, your creativity that transforms our words into material. This would not exist without your visions, your labor, and your care. Although not here, Jay and Shauna, for the support that keeps us afloat. Thank you, Flora and Mallory, for moderating the expansive and imaginative panels. Thank you, Dr. Stacy Alamo, even though you're not here, and Meech Boakye. Thank you for your generosity, your brilliance, and your willingness to share your ways of being with us. To our panelists and workshop facilitators, thank you for bringing your research, your practice, and your whole selves into this space. To the artists whose work has held us all weekend, thank you. And to each of you who came, who listened, who asked questions, who sat with discomfort, who allowed yourselves to be changed, thank you. We're all part of the ecology we've been thinking about, breathing together, affecting and being affected. Bodies, stories, and worlds all entangled. Thank you for these 3 days. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your continuing to imagine, embody, and enact the futures we need. Keep growing. Please stick around. As Megan mentioned, after Meech's presentation, there will be snacks and refreshments. And most of all, stay connected. Thank you all for showing up.
Okay, thank you, Lowen. I'm so very honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Meech Boakye. Earlier today, Meech led a workshop that was such a beautiful embodiment of their creative practice. Participants in the workshop were given the opportunity to play with foraged salt and seaweed gathered from the Oregon coast, comparing and contrasting the various shapes, textures, and flavors. They collaborated and experimented to create a translucent, compostable biomaterial from seaweed and decorated it with flowers, leaves, plants, and natural pigments. And they learned how to preserve seasonal fruits and vegetables in a salty brine that encourages natural fermentation. Meech guided the workshop participants with their deep knowledge of histories, process, and materials, while exuding a playfulness and openness to the surprises and material shifts that often come with working in natural processes and with natural materials. It was a true delight to partake in the workshop, and we are so thankful to Meech for sharing with us. And now we are also honored to have Meech share more about their work and process with us through their artist talk tonight. Meech Boakye is a Canadian-American artist and researcher based in Portland, Oregon, working across writing, publishing, sculpture, foodways, material research, and public programming. Their practice is rooted in relationships with human and more than human species. Boakye's practice engages in collaborations with multi-species kin, ranging from biomaterial research to digital gardens to fermentation workshops. Their work has been exhibited at the Brick, Oregon Contemporary, Susan Hobbs Gallery, Gallery 44, and the Art Gallery of Guelph. Their writing and comics have appeared in C Magazine, The Globe and Mail, Oregon Humanities, and Variable West. Supporting their practice, Boakye has received numerous grants, including the Simons Foundation, Oregon Humanities, and the Regional Arts and Culture Council. Thank you to Meech. Very excited to welcome you to share your work with us tonight.
Hi, everyone. Oh, no, that's okay. Hello? Okay. I think that's good. Yeah. Can you hear me? Cool. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Megan. That was a lovely introduction. I loved your reflections on the workshop today. My name is Meech Boakye. I'm a Canadian-American artist. I was born in Canada and spent a lot of time in the United States, in the South, the Southwest, the Midwest, and also went to high school in Brazil, which was a little bit random, but it was a lot of fun. I wanted to thank everyone for inviting me here today, for helping me make everything happen. It was really, really a team effort, and I appreciate being invited to talk about my work. It's really the first time I've been asked to do that, and I think the exercise is both difficult and very helpful in recognizing that I've done things and that they matter. I also really want to thank my parents and my partner who have always encouraged me to continue making art. I mean, my parents didn't at first, but they've come around, and education's a really big part of that. And so being able to do this at a university feels really good. I didn't particularly like university when I was there, but I've kind of come around 5 years later to understand that I am constantly learning, and it's maybe the most important thing I can do is both learn and teach people what I've learned, which is why doing workshops is actually one of my favorite things to do. So I'm really happy I got to do that today. I say that I'm an artist and a researcher because a lot of the work that I do is research. I don't make a lot of objects, although you'll see up here, this is a ACRE bioplastic that I made, which is an object, but it actually decomposed about 2 days later. So it's really just the documentation of this thing that I did. When I say I work in collaboration, it means that all of the work that I do involves other beings. So in this case, I was working with water, I was working with agar, I was working with glycerin, all different materials derived from things like seaweed, and water is water, a living thing. And also I think about the afterlife of my work being also part of that process and also somewhat of a collaborator. If this thing is being composted, the soil and the microbes in that soil are doing the work of taking this life, taking this object's life. So what I want to talk about today is going to be kind of 5 years of practice, how I've kind of gotten to this place of calling myself an artist and researcher, and what it actually means to make relational work for me. Talking about a relational practice, again, is kind of different, I think, than talking about a practice where objects are sort of the primary thing. But I think this is a really good space to do that because we are talking about ecological futures, and I think relational practice and working with biomaterials and food and things are kind of that way forward. So my first houseplant was an OG Kush clone, actually 2 of them, and I grew them in this hydroponic garden called an AeroGarden. My dad had gotten it for my mom a few years ago, and I don't know if she actually wanted it or if it was one of those things dads do where they get you a gadget. But she liked it, and I tried it out. In Canada, weed was legalized federally a few years ago. And despite knowing this, I still was really scared to grow this in my house. But I also kind of wanted to bring it to school and to test the boundaries of what legality meant for me, when only a year before, being black and having weed in my house would have gotten me arrested. I also kind of came into this with kind of rah-rah political ideology that I thought I was going to prove in sort of bringing this thing to school, and I don't know, I think I was a bit cheeky about it. And I think this project really taught me that what I was the same as these women in these e-commerce images. I was kind of doting over this AeroGarden in the same way, relating to these plants and forming a relationship with them. And it kind of softened me a little bit, actually. I realized that maybe the important thing about this project was that I got to grow a plant. Actually, all of these herbs were growing beautifully, and I started actually gardening because of it, I think. This project was also somewhat instrumental in figuring out what it is I wanted to do for the next 5 years. A former TA, Dana Preto, made this project called Beyond Extraction, and it was part of the Beyond Extraction Counter Conference in Toronto, Canada in 2020. It actually happened maybe like an entire month, I think like 4 weeks before lockdown happened. And so it was a really strange way to kind of be with people and then not all of a sudden. In Canada, there's this mining conference called the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada Conference, PDAC. And basically it's where a bunch of people who are like loggers or miners, like all of like the evil guys, like all of them get together and they talk about, I guess, like doing more of it. I don't really know. But it's this big conference, and there's a counter conference that went on, maybe it still goes on, it went on for a few years to kind of go against it. And what Dana was doing here was she was taking the 3 sponsor countries that each year there's like 3 countries. I think this one was like Peru. It's like a couple of South American countries. And she was developing a menu with this chef Milo based on the cultures of their countries. And what we did was we created this meal, and we created this like mobile food cart, and we like rolled it into the protest to feed the protesters during the protest. Sorry, I said protest 3 times there. And so as you can see, this building, this is where the conference was held. There was this big protest, and we were there serving food for people. And this was kind of the first time that I had like served food to people for free. But, you know, what I really enjoyed about it was that I had like a purpose, like, you know, in contrast to this project here where I kind of came into it trying to illustrate this like political concept, as one does often in art school. I liked being able to just do it, that I was at this protest, I was feeding people, and that was the whole work. And that sort of like stuck with me as like, oh, this relational thing of me feeding you, that is the work. That's all it is. Of course, lockdown happened, and I couldn't be out for a little while. I actually went to Louisville, Kentucky, and was there actually just a couple weeks after Breonna Taylor was killed. I'd never been to Kentucky. Well, actually I had, a couple months before for the first time, just to visit my parents. Because my parents moved around a lot, they were often in new places when I visited them, and this was one of those places. Louisville was a really strange place to be at the time because of that killing, but also because I had no relation to it and no real way to become related to it like I couldn't know the people. I couldn't go out and talk to people until the protests happened. But I did get to know the land really well. And this is a photo of a bioplastic I made in the backyard. I found a dead bee and made a little burial in this bioplastic. It gave me a lot of time when I was living with my parents to experiment with things like foraging and fermenting and bioplastics. It gave me access to a lot of space. There was a big forest in the backyard that I could explore. It was also like very suburban, so a lot of the flowers that I put in the bioplastics were like covered in Roundup and pesticides, which was this weird thing to work with. So I couldn't forage them, but I could at least like work with them in some way, give them a different life. At this time, I also really started to understand what collaboration meant with non-humans. You know, this project I just did before with Dana, it was a very collaborative human thing. And all of a sudden I was alone. And so I started to understand that my collaborative partners were not just humans, but they were also the plants and the bugs and the fungi that were growing around me. And this kind of created a shift in the way that I thought about what collaboration could look like. I did a lot of food, or made a lot of food for my family. To varying degrees, they liked it. I think sometimes they would be really confused at what I was making, but I had a lot of fun. And a lot of this food was bought at like the farmer's market, or I grew in my own garden. I started gardening at this time and really fell in love with working with flowers as food, both herbally and also like through fermenting them, which maybe I'll talk about later, I don't know. But you can ferment, or you can leaven bread with flowers, and it's really cool. This is also a time where, again, without being in school, but also like having online classes, things like that, I was trying to figure out how to make my work public again. A lot of this happened honestly through like social media. So, you know, these were all like shared on social media, and, you know, that was kind of growing a sort of strange little food community on there. But I also started making websites, and that was like, that kind of clicked to me that like publishing was a way to make public in the sort of void of quarantine. So this was my final undergrad thesis. We had to really switch gears very quickly when the pandemic happened, literally a month before opening, and we realized, oh, okay, like this isn't gonna happen. And so a website was kind of a way to, you know, put a lot of the research and things that I had been building to create this project online. And in all honesty, this is actually where I fell in love with publishing, was through making websites. This website isn't like good or anything, but it was a way to orient things in space for people to explore. And at the time, you know, I come from sort of like a design illustration background, and a lot of that work is meant to really orient people to find things, to be clear, and to really like say something. And the websites that I like to make actually usually say like nothing, and they're really hard to navigate. And I really enjoy that. I think it's like kind of a fun explorative process to enter a website and not know where the menu is, and maybe there isn't a site menu. Maybe you can't search the site. You just kind of have to click around and see what you find. Okay, cool, I was like, I need a way to show how to get to this other part. My friend Evelyn and I both graduated during the pandemic, and we were working on this like Google Doc letter writing thing that we did. It was kind of a way to keep us accountable, to keep making things, but also, I don't know, I think it kind of kept us sane in a lot of ways. We were both trying to figure out, like, in a similar way, when people graduated in 2008 during the crisis, like, what are we supposed to do now? Like, we just graduated, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I have no idea what to do next. This project, Slow Living Cookbook, was a response to a response. So the sort of initial idea here was, I don't know if you've ever heard of this person, Paul Soelis, but he has like a collective called Queer Archive Work. And they put out an urgency reader during the pandemic, which was just like this collection of essays and signs and just beautiful Riso printed things. And one of the essays was called A Call for Sick Speech, which basically this anonymous person talked about how the university in this moment needs students to survive, and yet we're kind of not getting what we need out of the university. And so there's this strange thing happening where, you know, we're paying for an education that isn't the same as it was last year. And maybe we're going through crisis, and maybe the world is going through crisis, and we're still expected to kind of go through our day-to-day. And so the way that this person talked about sick speech, they were basically describing it as a call for complaint, and thinking about complaint as this thing that we're not really able to do all the time. We're not able to like complain about our working conditions or about our schooling. And if we are able to complain, maybe this will help us feel a little bit closer to each other. Maybe it'll get us to a place of figuring out how to solve those complaints. And so we asked our peers, to also kind of be a part of this anonymous call for sick speech. And what we did was we collected all these things, we kind of made it our final project, and we made our teacher give us all 100% on our project. And he wasn't very happy about it, but he did eventually comply. But Evelyn and I were like, okay, we've complained, what do we do now? And we started writing to each other in a Google Doc. And this is sort of our attempt at code. We learned how to code to make this website. kept it really simple. But it takes a lot of that writing and the comments and all these things and puts it in one place. This website doesn't actually exist anymore, which is why I have a video of it. We let it decompose, so we let like the images like stop connecting, we let the sounds stop working, and it eventually didn't exist anymore. And we did that on purpose, partly because we were writing, right out of school, and maybe we didn't want to have this on the internet forever because it wasn't very good all the time. But also because we wanted to have it end and then move on and make something else together. But it was another way of like thinking about a website as something that maybe didn't work the way a website's supposed to work. I was also working on this project. This is another collaborative project I did with my friend Roya. She was putting together a group of Black artists to create this VR world, and this is just my little section of it. But basically, it existed in the gallery through a portal that you physically walked through, but you could only walk through it if you were Black. So like, you could go in and you could see the portal, but you could only actually enter this virtual world if you were Black and like put on the goggles and everything. And this was my little garden that I made. I had a 3D artist help me create it. And actually none of you are Black, so I can't tell you anything else. I'm so sorry. But it was a really fun project, and it allowed me to also explore how like these little worlds on the internet, especially in this pandemic time, how we can kind of find ways of being together, because you could actually see other people in this world. You could also explore it online. And it was a fun little thing to do. All of this kind of online publishing led me to this project called Research Poems. And this is the homepage. Again, where do you click? I made this after being really interested in rennet, specifically, well, I guess I'll just go over what it is. Rennet is the thing that makes cheese. And the way that it's extracted is you have to actually kill a ruminant animal, so a baby cow or a lamb, and before they're around like 21 days old, and extract their stomach because they have an enzyme called chymosin that coagulates milk. That sounds crazy. And when I learned that, I was like, oh, that's so wild. I didn't realize that's what made cheese. I was really interested in like finding ways of replicating that coagulation process without using vegetable rennet. Vegetable rennet is a chemically, like, it's made in a lab. It's like lab-grown chymosin. It's fine. It's what a lot of our cheese is like made from today, but like a lot of like cheese you just get like doesn't taste like anything. It just kind of tastes the same. And that's partly because it's with this like very like replicable enzyme and lab-grown cultures as well. And so I was interested in using plant-based coagulants that I could forage. And I found that there were a few different ones that people had been using for a long time, namely stinging nettles, the stamens, so like the little things in thistles, like the little purple things in the middle of a thistle flower, and the sap from fig trees. So if you like take a fig off, there's usually this like milky sap that comes out. I don't know who like figured this out, but it works. And I ended up spending a few years researching this and putting it on this website. This is nettle cheese that I hung in the backyard after it coagulated. The thing about this website, so in this project, and this is kind of a theme, I think, where I come in with like this thesis, and then I kind of have to actually walk back at what I thought because I was a little bit naive. For the fourth chapter of Research Poems, I went to cheese school in McMinnville. It was like this 5-day intensive where I had to like take off work to just like watch this barefoot guy teach me how to make cheese. It was really fun, and I learned a lot. I actually held an abomasum, which is this sort of ruminant animal stomach, in my hand, and we made rennet with it. I sat in a rocking chair where that same lamb, their hide was draped across it, and they had these really tiny curls. It was kind of difficult and really beautiful all at the same time. What I realized was I was kind of looking at the act of making cheese with foraged coagulants in a very singular way. I'd been forgetting about the milk. I was getting milk, normally good milk from good farms, whatever, but I wasn't really thinking about it in this holistic way. I was just kind of trying to eliminate this thing that I saw as really bad and didn't really think about it in the whole picture. What I realized was there are ways of working with animals, even dead animals, that can actually honor that animal that you're working with. And one of the things that we did was during the cheese making process, we actually drew a cross in the curd. And I'm not religious, but Trevor, the person teaching us, learned this from the Italians. And basically what you would do is you cut the curd going once down the middle and then cross down the side. And this little ritual, even though it was very small, allowed us to say thank you. We had the stomach. It could create probably 1,000 batches of cheese. And I started to realize after milking this cow, after using the milk, after, being a part of this entire process, that there are ways of honoring the dead and working with living and dead beings. And that sometimes just trying to look away at the problem doesn't actually solve anything. Anyway, it became kind of a roundabout project where the initial thing that I was kind of appalled at became something I actually found a lot of beauty in. Research poems also was a way to explore research as an art practice. And sometimes that looks like this, which is sort of like Pepe Sylvia, like that Charlie Kelly and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, putting up all those red strings on the board. I find it actually really helpful to make maps like these. This was for a project where I was just kind of looking at the materials I was making, like glycerin. I was sort of talking about this earlier to someone in the workshop, but glycerin is this weird little thing that is in a lot of things that we consume, like toothpaste. And it's also like the precursor to making atomic bombs, which is a really strange thing. So like most things, like when you dig into materials or tools, a lot of times they have some war purpose. It's really strange and kind of scary. But as I took a step out, was looking at this, it really got me to a lot of different things, like Crisco, which Crisco is actually crystallized cottonseed oil. And so Crisco was a way to deal with the waste of all of the cotton plantations, which all that was kind of left was this cottonseed. What do we do with this thing? They made it into vegetable shortening, and that's how Crisco was made. So Crisco is also the aftermath of, or sort of a product of the plantation economy. I also thought about research as collaboration and also as a way to sort of make sense of things with other people. This project was called Less. I did it with my professor, the same professor that I brought the weed plants to. Him and I, after school ended, really developed a relationship and are still sort of collaborators in a lot of ways, writing together and finding ways of hanging out whenever we're in the same place. And what I really love about this work is that we tried to illustrate our relationship as a shelf, which doesn't maybe make sense from this image, but basically this shelf hung from the ceiling, and it had to sort of have both sides in order to actually stay up. And what we put on the shelf were these kind of little artifacts and remnants of the things that we were talking about. For example, this is Gareth's models for these desks that he made. They're desks made to cheat on. And we worked on this actually in different parts of the world, him in Toronto, me here. And he had some help from a student, don't worry, he didn't do it himself. But that process in itself was also difficult. You know, I was trying to like create a physical object without being there. But we were thinking about this shelf, and we were thinking about research as a sort of like collaborative practice. Conversation is collaboration, and all of these sort of roundabout things. Similar to the work that I did with Evelyn, I was able, and also with Gareth, honestly, I met Christina Kingsbury through a project at the Art Gallery of Guelph. And I actually didn't know Christina before I did this project, but we met in a similar way, writing letters through this Google Doc that we created. Christina is a really wonderful artist based in Guelph, Ontario. And when I was asked to do work at this show, I kind of noted that I didn't really know how to make work about land, which is sort of what this show is about, if I didn't know Guelph and I wasn't there. And so the curators brought in this artist, Christina, to help sort of orient and like ground me in Guelph so that I could make something that made sense. Christina and I ended up talking over several months, honestly mostly talking about the weather for a little while. We kind of realized that talking about the weather, especially now, actually isn't small talk. It's maybe big talk, because we're talking about the things that are changing every year. But Christina and I both had gardens, and she also lived by this riverbank that used to be a landfill, and was sort of rewilded over the past several years to create a sort of community space. And what we ended up doing was mapping her walk along this riverbank with all of the plants, specifically invasive species that we found as she walked around. We were connecting disturbed sites, so landfilled sites, polluted sites, things of that nature, to the growth of invasive species, thinking about the ways that in these really kind of hard to grow spaces, we find a lot of invasives. We also, through this process, we're starting to understand that our relationship to invasive species was maybe not our own. It was coming from a place that was really sort of hate-filled, that we hadn't actually created ourselves. When you look up invasive species on the internet, a lot of the government websites are like incredibly, I don't know what the word is exactly. Basically, the language used to talk about invasive species feels very akin to the way that we talk about immigration. You know, there's a lot of words around eradicating things immediately, using pesticides, and like having that be the only option to get rid of these species. When what we were trying to understand was, how can you only use pesticides when we're also trying to conserve or like make good of this native landscape as well? Wouldn't that also leach into that soil? So we found a lot of contradictions, and also we were trying to question how our relationship was shaped by this language. So we were thinking about the word transplant instead, thinking about how the ways that plants have migrated across the world are often done without their own autonomy. And so when they arrive in these new places, really all they're trying to do is survive. Some of them survive better than others because they were just kind of built that way. For example, Japanese knotweed is something I've been really interested in for a while, because it grows in Japan on the hillsides of volcanoes, which, of course, if it grows on the hillsides of volcanoes, it's going to grow really well in your backyard. Like, that's nothing to it. Christina and I really were thinking about that, and we created this transplant walk along the Aramosa River, where she guided a bunch of folks down to forage, and she ended it in this beautiful little seating around a fire made of mullein stalks, which is like a plant that grows most places. Their seed pods are really flammable, so you can make a fire out of them, like a little torch, and she made a little fire there. This work was, it still comes into pretty much all of the writing that I do. I think about transplants as I think about water, and I think about migration of slaves, and I think about what's happening now with these ICE raids, I think there's a lot we can learn about the way that we think about plants and sort of these ingrained things that we see as normal when we relate them to our own histories and the histories of people around us. A project that I did last year brought some of these ideas together around a film called Foragers. Foragers is by Jumana Mana, who's a Palestinian filmmaker. And she chronicled the lives of several Palestinians who were foraging zakub and zatar, which are two sort of native plants in Palestine. And they were constantly getting arrested by Israeli conservationists and police, stating that they were making these species endangered. You know, as we probably know, it's probably not true. Similar things happen to indigenous folks here as well. Conservationists sort of saying that by interacting with land, that you are causing danger to an ecosystem. We know actually that that's not true. We actually can create very honorable and reciprocal relationships with plants when we forage that don't lead to the endangerment of these plants. However, Foragers was obviously thinking about how this has like political ramifications as well. The erasure of a culture can happen also through the erasure of the traditions and the way that we interact with our environments. This screening I did for free in Los Angeles, and I made a menu that was based off of some things that I forage at the Arlington Garden, as well as some things from the local farmers market. It was a really fun time. I got to give everyone a free meal, and I also made them a salt and this postcard of wild fennel that I made at Arizo. I really like giving gifts. I think it's become a really central part of my practice. For the Portland Biennial a couple of years ago, I gave away a calendula seed packet of like 7 different types of locally grown or locally sort of cultivated calendula. And here I gave this salt. I think giving food for free, giving gifts is something that I have to do. I grew up, incredibly privileged, got to go to school, and every moment I can get to give free food or give free gifts, I will. I think, it's something that I feel very strongly about. And I'll talk a little bit later about other ways that I like to do that. Oh, also, I think I put here, okay. So this program was also in conjunction with a show at the Brick called Life on Earth. I ended up making these soap bricks right before they rebranded to the Brick, which was very funny. It wasn't related, but I think I wanted to talk about here how I try and make materials last. So switching gears a little bit. I'm going to also check the time really quick. Okay. All right. I'm going to wrap up a little bit. So because I make a lot of ephemeral materials, because my work is very relational, making work last is kind of difficult. Like that actually is a really hard thing for me. And so what I worked on last year at the Brick were these soap sculptures, which are currently in the Netherlands at The Hague, not The Hague, but in that city. And they'll come back to me and I'll get to use them as soap, which is really fun. When I was thinking about how to make things last and also for them to travel, because, it can be strange to make work about land and ecology and then ship it all over the world if it's like this big thing. So I wanted to actually make something very small. But a lot of my work is like documentation of a process. And so making soap in this way, this was kind of a way of documenting the soap making process. I also do a lot of printmaking. I print out of a studio called Noon Studios at the Alberta Abbey, which is a sort of BIPOC space run by Sharita Town. And learning how to print make has been invaluable to me. Again, coming from this design background where I was making things for companies, this has been really fun. I work a lot with like public domain images. These are all sort of things I found through public domain on like archive.com and stuff and books. And it also allows me to make a lot of the research and the conversations I have with others into books. And so this was for a show I did last year called Grazing. It was about my grandfather and his prize cows that he had to raise growing up. And these were just some words that came up in conversation. But this is like, I think it ended up like being like a 30-page book or something. There's like an essay that goes through it. But I printed all of these words on different papers and with different inks. And it was a really fun way to just like play with the Rezo as a machine. These were some cyanotypes I made this summer. I was working at a place called ACRE. It's this beautiful queer experience. It's an artist residency in rural Wisconsin. And it is a place where I absolutely fell in love somehow with spiders and sweat. And yeah, it was wonderful. I made these cyanotypes not really realizing what I was doing at the time, but they became a kind of accidental altar. This is kind of all the stuff I made at the residency. And this image on the right is a sort of reverse, what is it called? The negative image of a dead fawn that I encountered on a hike trying to find nettles earlier this year. And when I was making the cyanotype, I don't know if you know anything about the process, but basically it's just like you put a light-based emulsion on paper or actually anything. And when it reacts with the sun, all of the positive things become, I'm actually saying that backwards. Basically it creates a print. It's a really fun way to just sort of like work with an environment to make a print. But as I was printing this, I gathered some elderflowers and I sprinkled them over this image of this fawn. And it was like this thing I didn't realize I was doing until I did it, but it kind of felt like I was doing a sort of burial for her. When I took the picture, I didn't really know what to do with it, but I knew that I wanted to take this picture. But it's a little bit gruesome, it's a little bit strange, and this was kind of a way of honoring her without showing sort of all of the details. When I hung the photos up on the last day and put these sort of herbs that I had found next to her, I presented it to everyone and blew bubbles, which you can kind of see little remnants of. Normally I do like libations with water or salt water before my workshops and public programs, but for some reason bubbles felt like the way to do it. So we kind of honored her and honored our own griefs with bubbles. I love doing workshops. They have become incredibly important parts of my practice. This was one of the first workshops I did with Elbow Room, which is a outsider alternative art space that caters to folks with developmental disabilities. They do really good work. And this was like it was somewhat difficult because I had to think about how to talk without talking. There were some folks there that were nonverbal, and so I just needed to learn, or I needed to figure out how to teach fermentation in ways that were kind of encompassing other senses. But everyone ended up making these beautiful lists of all the things that went in the jars, and it became this kind of list poem exercise that I hadn't really expected. This is a bioplastics workshop I did in New York about 2 weeks ago that I did again today. We kind of already talked about it, so maybe I won't go too into it, but this sort of workshop that I've been developing is around the idea of like salt and water being a sort of transformative medium to hold joy and grief and kind of act as a portal in that way. When we think about the Middle Passage, there is something obviously left unsaid in that grief. It's still very much held by myself and I'm sure many others. And so sometimes walking into the ocean can feel like you're letting go of it in some ways. And I've been trying to explore why that feeling exists, and kind of playing with it a little bit. So working with algae, bioplastics, and fermentation with a saltwater brine has been a really nice way of doing that. Our last few minutes here. Okay. I'll just talk really briefly about some of the public programming that I do that's kind of stemmed from these workshops. So working with slightly larger groups, I've been able to cultivate publics around my work, really just by offering free food, which is kind of an easy way to get people to come to your things. I worked on this project with Jade Novarino when I first got here. She was doing an agroecology film screening, and we got to watch a movie at Campo Collective at Stoneboat Farm on the side of this truck that they take to market. The film that we watch is called Chão, or Landless, which follows the Movimento Sem Terra in Brazil, which is a group of farmers who are trying to take back the land that they were working because they're obviously not being paid enough to work there. And so I was able to create a meal and sort of take a lot of the experiments that I had been working on in quarantine and serve it to people. On the left, you'll see some bread that I made. This is what I was talking about earlier. This bread was leavened by calendula petals. So if you'll see on the right side, there are some like orange petals in a jar. And I created a sort of fermentation out of that to leaven this bread. I also made some medicines that went in salad dressings and things like that. It was a very kind of like herbalist thing. It was very fun and very silly. We kind of put it all out on a table and everyone got to eat with their hands. This is a photo of this year's Garlic Fest that happened on September 6th. Happened a little while ago now, but this is our third annual Garlic Fest. It was a really fun occasion this year. Many more people than I thought would came, and I don't know why it keeps growing, but I also kind of know why. I think the festival could be about anything. I think people just want excuses to eat food and be together. It was a lot of fun. I invited this artist, Biz Miller, who had this beautiful puppet, and they made it a garlic puppet for this occasion. Everyone was asked to bring a potluck dish, and it ended up creating, we'll figure out the logistics a little bit better last year. I didn't think there'd be a line or not enough room for food, but I really enjoy what people bring to this event, and I think that this event actually only exists because of what people bring to it. And so I kind of end at Garlic Fest because it's actually my favorite thing that I do. It feels somewhat outside of my practice and also completely encompassing it. But it exists at various micro farms around Portland. And it was inspired by this film, Garlic is as Good as 10 Mothers, which follows the Gilroy Garlic Festival that happened in Gilroy, California until I believe 2021. The festival ended because the organizers couldn't get insurance after a shooting happened that year, which feels so uniquely American. And so we wanted to pick it back up. And so since 2023, me and a group of collaborators, namely Jade Novarino, but also Ivy Dockstader and Lauren Johnson, we've been running this event at various farms. I encourage you all to come next year. It really is a lot of fun. It's very silly. We have this person named Ian who actually specializes in growing 60 different kinds of garlic at his farm, and he brings them all to us. We do like a tasting. We made a zine this year. where Jade interviewed a bunch of farmers. This is like a little alcove behind a garlic flag that my friend made. This was our photo booth in 2024. Someone made this awesome garlic puppet. That's some food from the first year. Every year I make like a mound of butter. That's what that is. And this person named Gregory, who teaches calligraphy at Reed, made this beautiful sign for us. He told us that he did it 3 times, so he kept spelling it wrong. Okay, that's it. I apologize for going a few minutes over, but thank you all. I think we can open up for questions if there are any. I'm happy to answer them here or later when we eat. No pressure. Yeah, please.
Your slides are so beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much.
So I guess I'm wondering, like, how you view your, I'm not sure if you're doing these photographs or and the graphic design and stuff, so, like, how do you do the photographic practice / graphic design practice alongside the more material or process-based work?
Totally, yeah. I mean, they're completely intertwined for me. So because I work with things that don't last long or with people, I have to photograph them well to capture what happened. I also think good design, when it comes to, again, I think when I talk about good design, it doesn't always mean good design in the same way that good design is talked about. Sometimes it's like fun design or it's like confusing design, but it creates an experience in some way. And so like when I design my websites, what I'm thinking about is how do I replicate something that was relational virtually? And maybe the way to do that isn't just showing photos on a page. Maybe it's creating a sort of like roundabout experience where you have to click around and experience it. So yeah, I find them like, I find knowing how to photograph things well and design well is like one of the only ways I've been able to share what happened. Sometimes, yeah. Yeah, this was film. You know, this was the first year. This was actually really fun. We did a film photo booth, so we just let people just trusted us to just sort of develop the film afterwards. But this year we did get a photographer for the event because since there are all these little tiny spaces you can exist in, we realized we couldn't really find them all. So this was by a photographer named Ivana Ramos, and she did an incredible job. But yeah, everything else I just kind of photograph on my own. Thank you for the question.
I have a question.
Please.
You're a gardener as well as being an artist.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear how your garden influences your artwork and how your artwork influences your garden in terms of, you know, what you grow and what you focus on and what you learn through tending the plants and how that all kind of, and the slowness, that's obviously like a huge part of your practice. How do all those things kind of work together?
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I would say like my first garden that I had during quarantine was really a complete departure from my practice. I'd kind of said, I'm actually not going to make art anymore. I'm just going to garden and make bread. And of course, it became my practice. But these days, my garden exists in a community plot in Northeast. I also am a member of Albina Co-op, which if you all are interested in gardening and don't have space to do it, that's a really good place to do it. It's a cooperative garden that works really different than the community gardens here, where we have sort of our own little plot, but everyone at that garden is able to work anywhere and harvest anywhere. I would say a lot of the stuff that I grow, I love growing edible flowers and herbs. When you buy herbs in the supermarket, honestly, sometimes even at the farmer's market, they're really expensive. More so at the supermarket, but I love growing my own herbs. I think herbs are like, if you don't know how to cook and you want to cook, grow herbs. It's like it changes everything. It makes everything feel fresh, especially in the winter. It's like a wonderful thing to have. And yeah, I grow a lot of flowers. Like that's like my bread and butter, just because it's nice to have flowers around all the time. I think it's awesome. Sometimes I do think like it is still separate in some ways. I think like I love to sing and I love to make music, like bad music. It's not good. But I kind of like to separate that from my practice, even though it is an artistic thing to do. And I think gardening is kind of a similar thing, where it's nice to have some creative things that are just completely unrelated. And so in some ways I use it a lot in my materials and like the things that I cook, like all the stuff that I showed earlier, like a lot of that is stuff that I grew myself. But yeah, I think it's also kind of a nice little place to not think about it. Thanks for the question.
Anyone else?
Feels weird to use a microphone when we're all just right. I'm curious if you could talk more about the collaborative part. You said you've done like human collaboration and then non-human collaboration. I'm thinking a lot about collaboration in my own practice with weaving and with wool, and thinking about the people who grew the wool and the sheep who grew the wool. And it feels, sometimes I feel like I'm making it up. I'm like, well, they're not actually here, but like at some point of the stage they were. So I'm thinking about like emotionally we're collaborating. I don't know. I'm just wondering if you could say more about non-human collaboration, how you think of that, because when you say it, I believe you.
That's awesome. Well, I feel like even thinking about what Sugar was talking about, I was overhearing Sugar's workshop earlier. And they were talking about how the material, like they have a relationship to the material, even though, you know, it isn't currently living, maybe, I don't know, maybe it is still alive. I guess the way that I think about collaboration in sort of non-human or more than human ways is actually exactly what you're talking about. Like this material that you got doesn't just like appear in thin air. And so when we think about collaborating through materials, I think we kind of like take a step back and understand like all of the processes that got us to this place. And it's not just the animal, it's all the hands that made it into yarn, right? These are collaborations. Like I can't make art in a vacuum, even if I wanted to. And so I kind of think about it in that way. When I first started making food, I was really interested in understanding where my food came from, which is a very, like, I think, easy, normal impulse to have. And through that process, things just kept unwinding. And sort of what I was talking about with the research and these kind of maps that I make, this is a similar kind of way of like thinking, how I sort of think about collaboration. I kind of try and unpack where are all of these relationships happening. And oftentimes they're far more complex than I could ever even fully map, but they exist. And so in that way, like mapping like where something actually began is a way of thinking about collaboration. But also, I don't know, I think material is also alive. Like there's like object-oriented ontology that kind of thinks about that, like objects that we don't really see as living, as having sort of an agency in some way or a consciousness in some way. And we don't always have to think about it magically, but you know, if the water that I am drinking can also be alive, if the rocks could also be alive, like there are ways of thinking about material that have more liveliness than maybe we give them credit to. So I think some of it's magic, some of it's real, but it's all collaboration.
Thank you, Meech. I'm curious about, maybe not curious. I am wondering if you have a cookbook in the making or recipes. Simply, that's one question. The other is about gift giving as a form of collaboration and how there's this essence that I am sensing of like site specificity and wandering and like finding these gifts along the way of like your websites or foraging as well, of like how those are also gifts of like you have to maneuver sites in ways. And I'm curious if there is a ritual that you do before you go on these foraging adventures, or whatever other language you like to use in regards to this relationship. Yeah, those are some of my...
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah, I would say, so no cookbook in the works, mostly because I don't think I could do it. I do not have what it takes to test recipes. I just kind of make shit and hope it works. But I do like the idea of a cookbook. And I was thinking, honestly, even around Garlic Fest, maybe we'll put together something with what people have brought over the past 4 years. So maybe a community cookbook, but I doubt that I would make one. When it comes to, you said so many things, and it made me think so many things. In regards to gifting, one of the things that I think, I've never likened it to foraging, but I actually think that's a really beautiful metaphor. When I think about foraging, there's this beautiful book called The Mushroom at the End of the World that probably heard of. But it talks about like this encounter, and this sort of, that also being like a beautiful process. You know, foraging is a very different thing than going to the supermarket, because you don't know what you're going to find, and sometimes you find nothing. You kind of have to just like go home and be happy about it. But getting a gift is a similar thing, where you are given something, and because you didn't pay for it, there is like impetus to just sort of be happy about it. And I think that this is a really nice way to counter the way that we're normally supposed to feel surprised and happy about things. You know, an advertisement is trying to sell us this gift, or it's not this gift, sorry, is trying to sell us this experience of encountering something new, right? And in that process, we're supposed to be really excited about it. And maybe we are for like a moment. We buy something and it feels good, but then there's kind of an emptiness there. A gift kind of does the opposite. A gift actually continues to grow. Like maybe you'll find something that you were gifted several years ago and it still makes you feel really happy because it took nothing from you and it gave you something and it continues to give. And I think similarly about foraging, even though I usually eat the things that I forage or, you know, preserve them in some way. But I think gift giving as an art practice, thinking about it through the lens of foraging as well, allows us to relate to each other very differently, allows us to relate to objects very differently. And yeah, I do really think a lot about what goes into gifts, whether it just be making food for others. Like, even if it's free, I want to find ways of making it beautiful. Even if the gift is salt, I want to find ways of making it complex. So I forage that salt, like all of the herbs in it came from foraged or from friends or from my garden. I don't know. I think there's something really fun about taking a lot of thought into doing something that you're giving away. And I think it really is coming from this place of wanting to counter the thoughtlessness of buying things, you know? Thank you all. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Yeah. You have this really cool like interplay of the textual and the visual. And I'm just kind of curious about like how you think through like the relationship between the textual and the visual, or like, yeah.
When you say textual, do you mean like texture or text?
Text.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Yeah, I words keep coming out. I don't really know why. A lot of the shows that I've done, I think actually words on walls and page and paper have actually been a really nice way of, again, documenting that relational work. I make a lot of lists when I'm making things and when I'm planning things, and so I think they end up happening and coming out on the other end as well. But actually, it's a mystery to me, like truly. I write a lot nowadays, right now for Oregon Humanities a little bit, and just wrote a text about Japanese knotweed, as I was talking about with my former professor. That writing was really fun. It's called Panic, and we talked about the panic of Japanese knotweed, specifically thinking about there were several cases of suicides and murder suicides from folks in the UK who discovered Japanese knotweed on their properties and were so devastated that their property value would go down that they killed themselves, which is a really strange thing to do. But we were talking about the panic of that and how maybe there are other ways of doing things. And so writing in that way can also be a way of like finding research and like making it contextual. But yeah, when it comes to like actual words and lists and poems in that way, incredibly mysterious to me still. really, really just like something that keeps popping up, and I only kind of see in hindsight the patterns, you know?
Calendula leavened bread.
Yeah.
Did you make that up? How do we do
Well,
it?
I don't think I made it up, but yeah.
Is there a book? Is there a website? Can you tell us?
Actually, yeah, that was in Slow Living Cocoa, but it is unfortunately decomposed. But I'd be happy to talk to you about it when we go eat. Yeah. It's similar to, have you ever heard of like ginger beer, ginger bugs? Similar process. You can do it with anything that has skin, petals. Wild yeasts are everywhere. It's actually really cool. You can make explosions out of a lot of things. I was talking about it in the workshop, but I was doing an experiment like that and did explode a bottle, and it went all over my ceiling in my apartment and did not get my deposit back because of that. Kind of went back and forth on email, and then they just sent me a picture of this huge splatter on the ceiling. I was like, all right, I guess that did happen. Yeah, I can talk to you more about the actual process, but it's simpler than you think. But yeah, and you can do it kind of with anything. Yeah, it's awesome. Thanks. Okay, amazing. Thanks, everybody.